easiest way to report sexual assault, or the way that someone would most commonly and correctly report sexual assault, would be directly to the police station. So if it's your local city police or municipal police department, that's where you would go first. Now, you could also report sexual assault in an employment sense to your employer, or the HR department would be another place. But it has to be to some hierarchy, right, in your employment, or in the case of an issue that is not related to your employment, to the police. Only sometimes. If you're a victim of sexual assault and you report it to the police in a timely enough manner that the police can investigate it and start basically, going forward towards criminal prosecution, then in that case, you will probably, you may or may not need a lawyer. You don't need a lawyer directly, because what's happening is the police are going to investigate it and send it to the prosecuting attorney. The prosecuting attorney is going to investigate it and potentially criminally charge somebody. And in that case, the prosecuting attorney, even though they're not your lawyer, they are a lawyer acting on your behalf as a victim of sexual assault. The time that you might need a lawyer is if basically you can collect from the individual or organization that is at issue. In that case, that's what we call a civil case. So in civil cases, that the only way to get justice is through collection of finances, essentially, in the civil world. And so in many of those contexts, we're looking at organizations, schools, somebody that turned a blind eye in a negligent context that led to a sexual assault, if that makes sense. So if that's the case, that's when you're probably going to need a lawyer. If you're an individual that has been sexually assaulted by another individual in a private premises that is not connected to any organization particularly, then, or company, then you may not need a lawyer. You should still ask. You should still consult an attorney, but you may not need a lawyer because your interests might be represented by the prosecuting attorney, and they might go forward with prosecution, if that makes sense. What a lawyer does to help you in the civil context is to fight to get you damages that you have sustained as a result of the sexual assault and that you will incur in the future. And a lot of time we think of it as counseling, but it's also just a number that relates to the pain and suffering that you have endured. So what a lawyer does is they go knock down all the doors. They do a lot of the investigation. They coordinate with the police, or they go get the police reports or crime scene investigation reports if that is relevant. And so they put all that together, and they basically put forward your case. And in any context, it would be to potentially be put in front of a jury. And many times it results in a settlement outside of the jury. Now, other than that, if you're going to have a criminal case going on at the same time, then your lawyer does not necessarily do anything in that criminal case. Your lawyer is basically separately on the sidelines working for you civilly while a criminal case is either going on or has already taken place. As soon as reasonably possible, I always think that the first people that you should call are the police rather than a civil attorney, because the police should be investigating your case. It's just like anything else when something criminal happens to you. The first thing you're usually doing is contacting the authorities or police officers or some higher level authority. And then when you're ready and you've established your report and there is an investigation, then you should contact an attorney, in my opinion. Absolutely, you can file a civil case, and it's also important that you do. And the reason is that there's a statute of limitations that applies. And in Missouri, for instance, the statute of limitations for assault and battery is going to be 2 years for an adult. And in that case, basically, if you know that you were assaulted, which is a majority of the time, then you only have 2 years from the date of that assault to file your case. Now, if it's a negligent action at this standpoint, although the legislature in Missouri is trying to change it, you'd have 5 years to report a negligent case. But really, if you have an ongoing criminal case, you want to be able to consult a lawyer and have them look at it, and they may advise you as to when they are going to file a suit on your behalf. And it may be sooner and it may be later, depending on the circumstances, but you really should advise a lawyer. And I've seen that go wrong for some people, unfortunately, too many times. Number one thing that you should consider is, was some sort of report filed, albeit a police report, an incident report, some sort of Title IX action? Was there some sort of investigation ongoing into the matter? That is a very good start. That's where you start before you contact a lawyer, generally, 9 times out of 10. It's like anything else, what you're going to want is evidence, right? So if there are text messages, we get a lot of cases where there are individuals that have sent text messages or photographs or some sort of actual evidence that, you know, this took place. Because in a lot of times we have he said, she said interaction. Those cases, as we know, have been historically hard to prove, especially in criminal courts. In civil courts, it's a little different depending on circumstances. But if you have evidence, get it or preserve it. That's really important. And if somebody is sexually assaulted at school, then again, I would start by calling the police. And we see this a lot of times. We have teachers or staff members or something like that that commit the sexual assault. And what you'll find is somebody always knows. Somebody in the facility always knows and is sweeping it under the rug. And it's not necessarily always the case, but it's oftentimes the case. And even if nobody knows, it's an extremely bad event if that happens inside a school. So again, that's a criminal act. What you should do is call the police. If nothing else, then you need to report it to somebody higher on the spectrum that's going to do an investigation. Is there liability first, right? Liability is, can we prove that the other person or entity or organization did something wrong? That's liability. Did they do something wrong? That's the assault, that's the negligence, or any variety of assault and negligence in between there. And if there is good liability, right? Good liability meaning we can show that there was an investigation, there was a police report, it's recent enough that the statute of limitations has not run and the witnesses and evidence is not deteriorated. So we have good liability. That's the first place you start and wondering whether or not you potentially have a good case. And then what you have to worry about separately is the unfortunate truth. And this is not, I have to have this discussion with a lot of people, which is kind of a tough thing to talk about, because the unfortunate truth is you have to have collectability. And that's the only way we get civil justice in a society. In criminal justice, the perpetrator can be put in prison, but in civil justice, the only way we can, bring that justice to a victim is by way of financial compensation. So there has to be some way to collect. And people would be surprised, but it's not always just a business or organization. Sometimes there's an insurance agreement that might be there, and you might have to talk to an attorney to see how good is the liability and how good is the collectability. And, we can't bring all the cases, and that's unfortunate. We'd like to bring forward all the cases that we can and help all the victims that we can. But the truth is, we can only bring the cases that we can prove and the cases that we can collect. And those two things are what we look for when we file these sort of civil cases. And we're always looking forward to hearing the stories of victims, and we're always looking forward to see how we can help. I actually know a lot about the arbitration stuff, and I know a lot about the arbitration stuff in the context of sexual assault, and I know about it in general. I wrote a piece in the Missouri Association of Trial Attorneys magazine on this. I fought a arbitration sexual assault case. And what arbitration is, which is a good place to start, right? What is arbitration? Arbitration is something that when a company or insurance company or organization wants to force the person bringing the claim to go to an arbitrator to decide their case instead of a jury. That's one person, usually that they choose, or that you have to decide between yourself and the other person to choose to decide basically what if anything, the company, organization, or perpetrator or insurance company is going to pay. And, you know, for most people, they'd probably think, that doesn't seem like such a bad idea. And even especially for sexual assault victims, they might think that it maybe is less intimidating than the prospect of facing a jury. But the truth is that it's only there to limit and take away from some sexual assault victims' ability to recover financially. The insurance companies, organizations, lobbyists have fought very hard to make arbitration necessary, because what they've done is appointed arbitrators that are inclined to give small awards or hold against victims. And so, you know, there's been a big fight about this for a long time, in forced arbitration in general, but especially in the context of a victim of sexual assault. And so what we've seen is Joe Biden has signed a bill, and by Joe Biden signing a bill, I mean Congress has enacted a bill in which Joe Biden signed, which would end or make it not illegal for someone who's a victim of sexual assault to be forced to go into arbitration. Now, if someone wanted to go into arbitration, that's something that they could agree with the other side on. And to tell you the truth, if somebody wanted to do that, maybe 9 times out of 10, the other side would want to do that. But that is not something that we lawyers think is beneficial to our clients. So what it's done is essentially given victims of sexual assault a chance to be represented and get justice on a large scale publicly.